Ja, god dag, kjære seere. Vi ønsker dere velkommen tilbake til oss her i Frikanalen. Vi ønsker dere velkommen hit til det vi kaller Trond Alis kvarter. Vi har i dag en spennende gjest, synes vi. Det er en velkjent jødisk rabbiner. Han sitter i New York nå og venter på en samtale med oss. Det er rabbineren Weiss. Han er internasjonal talsmann for en forening, en bevegelse, en organisasjon som heter Natura Carta, hvilket betyr jøder mot sionisme og mot staten Israel. Spennende tema, synes vi. Så vi overlater til ham å fortelle litt mer om denne organisasjonen, og hva som ligger i disse begrepene som gir navn til organisasjonen jøder mot sionisme og jøder mot staten Israel. Vi ønsker rabbiner Weiss velkommen til oss. We start again. Yes, please.
Yeah, yes.
Zionism, is it a Jewish ideology or not? The state of Israel, is it a Jewish state or not? May I please ask you to comment on this question? Thank you, Rabbi Weiss.
Yeah, I pray to the Almighty to bestow upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may be worthy of conveying His message. Although I am, with God's help, a spokesperson for Natura Carta, which is Jews United Against Zionism. This is a organization that is the voice for Jews around the world, globally, who speak up to correct a misnomer, to clarify what the view of the Jewish religion is, the basic Jewish religion. So therefore, although this is I'm representing an organization, but in truth, this is not really representing per se, an organization per se. We are representing the basics of what our religion, Judaism, is. So it is the voice of Jews universally who are true, who are loyal to the Jewish religion. And that said, anybody can, for themselves, prove it for themselves. They can verify this by going around the world, whether it is in Australia, where there's a very religious community, or they can, or if they would like to go that in Melbourne, Australia, where there's the most religious community there, or you will go to England and in London, Stamford Hills, or obviously in New York, where's the second largest Jewish community outside of Jerusalem. And right across from Manhattan, there is a place that's called Williamsburg, Brooklyn. It's a Williamsburg Bridge. Manhattan is an island. It's connected by bridges. One of them is Williamsburg Bridge. Right across from the bridge is the largest concentration of religious Jews. And it's the most religious Jewish religious community. And there you will find that there's not one single Israeli flag that is flying there. And the reason for that is because the concept of Zionism, this ideology of Zionism, that is today is very, very pervasive around the world, is in truth a contradiction to the religion of Judaism. It is a diametric opposite. It is antithetical to Jerusalem, to Judaism. It cannot be in any manner, shape, or form fused together. Judaism spits this out. It rejects Zionism, and there is a simple reason for this. It is because Jerusalem is. I'm sorry, I keep on saying Jerusalem because our basics, the basics of excuse me, a little have a cold. In Judaism, the core attack of Zionism was in Jerusalem, and that is where the movement of Natura Carta started. And there is the very religious community. Now, Judaism is to be subservient to God, and Zionism is an ideology of a nationalism, a concept of a material concept that transforms the Judaism as a religion, as a subservience to God, a spirituality. It is transformed entirely to a material concept of being a nation amongst nations, having a strong army, a piece of land, all the trappings of a material state. And it actually rejects the concept of being subservient to God. They are proud of the fact that they would like to call themselves a democracy, which is also a joke in and of itself, because they are not democratic. They do not accept and give equal voice to the Muslim community, to the Palestinians, or to the very religious Jews. But let's just put that aside. But the concept that we as a Jew, that we can pick and choose whether to be subservient to God or to be an atheist or something like that, that's not what Judaism is. Judaism is the accepting that the Almighty, excuse me, a creator to the world and a ruler to the world, the Almighty, and we have to be subservient to him. Judaism was the acceptance of a covenant 3,000 years ago that Jews made with the Almighty on Mount Sinai, that we will accept to be subservient to God and accept the laws of the Torah. And Zionism totally rejects that a Jew is obligated to be subservient to God or to accept his Torah. They're just proud to say that we are a democracy. They say you can do what you want, you just have to be loyal to your country. You don't have to uphold the Sabbath, you don't have to uphold kosher, and so on and so forth. This is a totally revolting ideology, because not only are they an ideology that flies in the face of being subservient to God, but it has the audacity to steal publicly the name of a religion, of a people that have just barely escaped the gas chambers of the concentration camps of Nazism, of the Nazis in Germany. My grandparents were killed in Auschwitz. I grew up, I was born in a community that were all immigrants, people who had escaped, barely escaped with their lives, had lost. I lost uncles and aunts, first cousins. I lost so much in that, and we barely escaped for one reason: because we are Jews, because we are subservient to God, and we are ready to suffer and give our lives for that. And these scoundrels, this movement of Zionism, has the audacity to take these downtrodden, these people, these who have suffered so much, and fly in their face and say, we are the religion of Judaism. We are the religion, and the religion means something entirely different. And to flaunt the Star of David and the name Israel, which is Jacob in the Torah, and to claim the right to this in the face of people who have just barely escaped with their lives. It's incomprehensible. It's beyond chutzpah, beyond hubris, beyond audacity, beyond evil. And of course, this evil carries over in the subjugation, in the oppression of the Palestinian people, because they decided to create their mother state, their land, their motherland, and their what they're proud of in Palestine, because that seemed to them to be an efficient place to be able to develop into a great country, but not just because they needed that land. In truth, they wanted to go to Uganda and other lands, which would have been much more practical, lands that were very lush grass, and with the agriculture at the time. We're talking now of over 70 years ago, when the basic growth of a land was in the agriculture and in the land, in the minerals and so forth of the land. And today it's in computers. But in those days, they were looking for a rich land, a fertile land, and they would have gone to another land. But they decided to pick Palestine because they understood that in order to have a country, you must have the support, the backing of the world nations, and you have to have a massive amount of money to back you to be able to create a land, a country. And so they were able to, excuse me, they were going to use the fact that Judaism has the Bible, has the Torah, the connection that we this covenant that we made 3,000 years ago, and which is supported and by the Christian religion around the world, that they do believe that you should support and help Jews to be able to have their land, the land of Israel, for the children of Israel, and they were going to use this support and the ignorance of, unfortunately, many, many Jews who are driven from the different countries where they were, and they are ignorant to their religions, and they were going to use this their emotions and their ties that they feel to God, to the Holy Land, and they were going to use this to be able to get support, this backing and support from around the world of both Jews and Christians. If they will make their homeland, instead of Uganda and all these fertile lands they were going to go to make their land, they decided to pick Palestine, because although Palestine needed a lot of work to develop it, but still they will be able to get the backing and the support of the world nations. Now, the Jewish religion, which again is our connection to God, to the Almighty foresaw with his wisdom, with the all wisdom, God is all wisdom, Almighty, and he foresaw that Jews who will be in exile for so many years, we are already 2,000 years in exile, that there will come a people from the Jewish religion, and they will be driven by the Satan. There's no other words for it. And they will decide to create a homeland. Now, God sent us into exile 2,000 years ago because God warned us that we are not on that high level of spirituality that we have the right to be as a nation, and one nation in the Holy Land. And we were sent into exile 2,000 years ago. And God warned us with 3 oaths in the Torah, and he said to the Jewish people through the prophets Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, anybody could look at the words of the prophets, and he told the Jewish people that we're under 3 oaths, that we were dispersed throughout the nations of the world, and we are not one. The oaths are one: we are not to return in mass, in large numbers, to recreate the Jewish nationhood. We should be serving God as holy people, as a nation of, as it says, a nation, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. We should follow all the words of the Torah, emulate God as much as a person can emulate the Almighty. That means just, and the rabbis explain, just as God is compassionate, mahu rachum af atu terachum, just as God is compassionate, you should be compassionate. Do not steal, do not kill. So we were warned that we have to uphold the words of the Torah, and we should not, the oaths are not to return in mass, to return to become a nationhood into the Holy Land. Secondly, we are not to rebel against any nation. We're dispersed into, whether it would be through Europe, Eastern Europe, West Europe, Australia, what country, Iran, Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, whatever you may say, wherever the Jews are, we are to pray for the well-being of that country and not to rebel against any nation. That's the second oath. We have to be loyal citizens in every country we reside. And thirdly, we are not to make any attempt to end this godly decreed exile. Again, the Jewish people were sent into exile because we were not on this high spiritual level that is required to be in the Holy Land, which is Palestine, basically, that as a nation. We were, as individuals, God did not banish us. So as individuals, Jews lived for these last 2,000 years under different rules, under the Ottoman Empire, and we were loyal citizens there to the nations that were ruling. But to take sovereignty into our own hands is expressly forbidden, and not even to return from all the countries in mass and large numbers to create and to try to create sovereignty. These are all, it's expressly forbidden. It's under an oath of God not to do that. Zionism, because they decided to create a nationhood, a nation, a sovereignty, a Jewish sovereignty, they in that manner they breached. All these 3 oaths. One, they said that Jews should return en masse. They encourage people to return, which they call aliyah, to go up and return there. Secondly, they rebel against nations, especially against the Palestinian people, that are living there. And thirdly, they constantly call themselves the beginning of redemption, and they try to explain that their existence and their rebuilding the Holy Land is rebuilding something, a connection to what the Jews had 2,000 years ago. And that is to us revolting, because how dare they compare their building this nationhood, this Zionist state, to something of the holiness of King David, with the Star of David, which he was subservient to God, and he only did God's will. And the only reason we went at that time when we left Egypt is because the Almighty commanded us to go into the Holy Land, and we were commanded that we are not to have a sovereignty. For 2,000 years, although we went through the Inquisition and Crusades and so much suffering, 2,000 years of suffering, and Jews had the opportunities in those 2,000 years. There was the golden age of Judaism during the times when Jews were banished from Spain and Italy. They had the opportunity from Spain when the era by the Jews were burnt at the stake in the Inquisition. They had the opportunity to rebuild, to buy a piece of land and create a state. Yet the Jews didn't do it, because our rabbis expressly warned us and kept on telling the Jews, remember, it's a godly decreed exile. We are not to create even 1 centimeter of Jewish sovereignty any place in the world, and certainly not to return and try to create this in Palestine, in the Holy Land. And that is regardless. They weren't even talking about if that there were people living there. They were talking about even if the land would have been desolate, because the Jews were driven from there, and it would have been a desolate land prior to the indigenous Palestinian people living there. Even if they would not have been living there, we would still be expressly forbidden to create a Jewish sovereignty. Certainly, being that people moved and a lot of people re-inhabited the land, so many people lived there for thousands of years, and to now to try to steal their right to the land, steal their homes, their land, their cities, their towns, and so forth. That is, again, breaching the laws, the basics of the Torah, that one shall not steal or kill, and to oppress others, to kill and to oppress and do harm to other people. Again, as we said, besides the rules of the Torah not to steal and kill, there's the blanket issue that one should emulate God, to be compassionate. It's all wrong from every way, every facet, way, any way you will look at this concept of the state of Israel, or their ideology behind it of Zionism, that we will stand up and create to be a proud nation. Everything, the core ideology is a rebellion against God, and the creation of the state in its fact on the ground breaches the laws of the Torah. The ideology of the state is, again, that it's a transformation of Judaism to nationalism, and it's also it's a mutiny against God. It's a rebellion against God, because it's stating that we will take matters into our own hands. We're going to take a Uzi. They had their guns then, the machine guns. We're a strong nation. What does strong mean by them? That they're going to take a gun. Not that God could protect us. Not that God should protect the Jewish people. We're going to protect ourselves. And they scorn and laugh at the Jews that say, "Who's our protector? The Almighty." And he doesn't need your nation. He doesn't need your piece of land. He doesn't need if we will follow the words of God, and God will protect us. They say, where is God by Hitler? Where was God by the Inquisition? So they ridicule and scorn the words of the Jewish people who are true to the Almighty, and they say, what did you get from following God? Of course, so in the way to call it Judaism is such a farce, is so ridiculous, because on one side of the mouth they refute the powers of the Almighty to protect, and at the same, and then they turn around to the nations and they put on this aura of spirituality and claim, oh, we are doing the will of God. It's total contradiction.
Rabbi Weiss, I think it's very, very important, all your points, and we really should reflect upon them. It's very important points indeed. I have a question, because some of us, we respect you as Jews, we respect your Judaism, we respect and we agree with many of your analyses. We are against Zionism, and we are against the Zionist state of Israel. But enemies of us, they call us anti-Semites. What is the point behind this? How you can explain this position? Thank you.
Well, with the help of the Almighty, you know, the brazen this people of this movement is just beyond comprehension. They have the audacity to go out, as I've said, and just simply take the name of Israel, the Star of David, and march around the world. They created a rabbinate and a chief rabbi, and they walk around. Although we have a chief rabbi, we have a rabbinate. We have a rabbinate, rabbis who've been living in the Holy Land under the Ottoman Empire and further constantly, and they were our representatives, and they stood up in opposition to this creation, to the Zionist movement that came in from Europe. They weren't originally from the Holy Land. They came in from Europe. This movement, and the rabbis pleaded with the government. Then it was the Ottoman Empire at the time, because they came before they created the state, the Zionist movement. They pleaded with them that we don't want this occupation, this movement. They're not the Jewish movement. This is a scandal. This is imposters. And then, in fact, finally, when it was really coming to seriously being introduced in the United Nations, as I've mentioned so many times, the chief rabbi of Palestine at the time, his name was Rabbi Dushinsky of blessed memory, and he pleaded with the United Nations. This is United Nations documents, and I'm just quoting one sentence from that. He said, in Declaration before the United Nations, July 16th, 1947, he said, "We furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine." These are the pictures. This is from United Nations records, and they were all ignored. We have tens of thousands of people. These are the streets of New York. This is in Jerusalem. You can see literally hundreds of thousands of people. These are welcoming the newly appointed chief rabbi of the anti-Zionist community in Nusparam 02. And this rabbi is still leading with God's help. So we have a rabbinate. Now the Zionists created a rabbinate and a chief rabbi, and the world doesn't even know that there's a Jewish rabbinate and a representation of Judaism. They don't even know who they are. They just know the rabbinate who traipses around the world with Bibi, not Netanyahu, their prime minister, and so they're given this this legitimacy, and therefore anybody who opposes them, they say it's a Jewish state. They like to refer it not as a Zionist state, but as a Jewish state. This is with an insidious. This is with a ploy. This is their a plan. They want to call it a Jewish state. So when anybody speaks up against them, is anti-Semitic. They do not mention that there was a Judaism of 3,000 years, and Zionism is a mere ideology, a mere 100 odd years. The state is only 70 odd years, and they don't mention to the world. They don't want you. They don't allow you. They consider it a crime. They try to make it in the law books a crime to speak up against Zionism, or to try to differentiate between Zionism and ideology, a clear difference, and Judaism, a religion. They go so far as that the Jewish people who stand up and demonstrate against them are brutally beaten, murdered. Our rabbis were assassinated. These are the Israeli army literally trampling the Jews. They drive into them with cars. They trample them. They murder them. We have thousands and thousands of pictures. You can see this. Go to our site, mkusa.org. It's there for anybody and everybody to see how Jews are constantly beaten, arrested, tortured, on and on. And they have a person has to serve in the army it's mandatory service in the military, in the IDF, Israeli Defense Force. Yet the religious Jews will refuse to serve in the army, boys and girls, and they get arrested and beaten. And every boy or girl turns 17 becomes a criminal. So now they can't say we're anti-Semites, but we're called self-hating Jews. They disparage us, they belittle us, they scorn, they try to, and or totally that we should be ignored in the world press. They don't, again, just ask a person, do they know that there's two rabbinates and that there's a chief rabbi of the religious community and then there's the rabbinate of the Israel? how does that jive? What is happening here? So the world understands that Zionism did such a successful job of a grand theft that the world understands that when you oppose Zionism, you're opposing this Judaism of 3,000 years. It's just mind-blowing, and it's the works of the Satan, because we are 3,000-year religion. We've died for that. My own grandparents died for this. Our blood was spilled, and yet we will continue living this Judaism, and never, with God's help, go under this oppression or accept the Zionism. Yet in the world, they have never been called to answer for their grand theft and what they're doing to people in the name of a religion. How could that be? I was in Geneva. We tried to bear witness. We went to Geneva because of what we created a wall and what they're doing to the Palestinian people, because we hurt, we cry. The Jews around the world, our rabbis, suffer and hurt for the people of Palestine. This is in 1948. The rabbis, Rabbi Chazan of blessed memory, carrying a white flag, went to the Jordanian leadership, and the Zionists shot our rabbis in the backs. They said, if you're going to go to the Jordanians, we will assassinate. And they killed our rabbis. They constantly did this. We used to live in total harmony and peace, Jews and Arabs together. We lived in the same courtyard, and the rabbis refused to accept this occupation. And it's totally ignored in the world. The United Nations, unfortunately, heard our words, heard the pleading of a community that was living there for thousands of years. We said, we are individuals. It's not our sovereignty. We do not want a Jewish state. It's against our religion. We're not allowed to steal, occupy, or have a Jewish state. And yet, this was, like I showed you, those words of Rabbi Dushinsky that has to be seared into the minds of every person. Has to remember this, that it's in the United Nations records in 1947 that the true chief rabbi, said, we do not want a Jewish state. So again, you individually and you as groups are attacked here in the United States also. People are attacked. People who are our best friends, our brothers and sisters who we work together, we help each other. People who have a history, their grandparents helped Jews, saved the Jews, did for Jews, and the Jews did the same. Likewise, help them in business, and help them in health wise, and doctors and so forth. And we helped each other. We lived together as we should, as God's creations. Yet everybody is being accused who dares to speak up the truth and pleading with people for what people call a humanitarian cause for the Palestinian people who are suffering. And we call godliness, to help the people of Palestine. Yet they are being accused so blatantly, so irresponsibly, as being anti-Semitic. There is no basis for this. It's criminal. It's repulsive. It's revolting. It's the works of Satan. But that is what God let the Satan into the world, and it's for our job and our responsibility, as in every generation, God gives us a test, and we have to stand up and not be intimidated. And you should not be intimidated. You should be continuing with your great work and speaking up for the people of Palestine, the suffering, because that is what God wants of us. And at the end of the day, the God who is righteous and God is compassionate will stand up, and we will be proud for what we have done, that we stood up for God's creation, for the people of Palestine, and for the Jewish people, who are all both suffering under this colossal crime, this occupation, this Nakba, this tragedy, this of occupying the Palestinian people and creating this Zionist state of Israel.
Rabbi Weiss, thank you again. It's very good points which you give to us. You mentioned the old Palestine. We know that it is an argument from the Zionists that there were not an old Palestine. It was a land without a people, and it needed people settling there to establish a new state. But we know that, I don't know if you agree, but we know that this is a lie. There was a people living in Palestine. There was a Palestinian people, and it was a Palestinian land, it was their land, and I think this is a lie that there were no Palestinians. We remember Golda Meir. She told that there was nothing called Palestinians. There was not a people living in that country, that land, and the Zionists could come and establish themselves there and build their Zionist state there. But we know that this and other arguments from the Zionists are not true. I suppose you agree with this. There was a Palestinian people.
Again, like, you know, it's just one more. What you say, it's just another link on this this sorrowful chain of this Zionist occupation, of the tragedy, this Nakba. Of course, there was there was maybe it didn't have the official name Palestine. It was under the Ottoman Empire. It had that's neither here nor there. That's just you will have the lawyers of a murderer will get up and he will prove if you're able to get a high priced, very, very good lawyer, he'll be able to take a murderer and convince the world that not only is he not the villain, but he's the victim. And that's a well-known issue throughout the world. It's a fact. Our rabbis themselves, in fact, maybe you've met with some of our old rabbis through the years. Rabbi Beck, he should be healthy, and the people who are already in the 80s and the 90s, and they all talk about them. In fact, we put out a book called The Rabbis Speak Out, 130-year record of religious Jewish opposition to Zionism. And we have rabbis who lived in Europe, 1839 to 1933, Rabbi Cohen, Yisrael Meir Cohen, one of the leading codifiers of Jewish laws. And he said, the Zionists are dead limbs of our people, which causes the entire body to rot. And he passed away in 1933. We have rabbis from the Holy Land, from from around universally, but from the Holy Land, and they spoke about this, about how the Zionists refute the facts that we lived together, we flourished under Muslim leadership in Palestine and in of course in every single Arab country. We have a Rabbi Yisroel Abu Chatzira called Baba Sali, blessed memory, who was from 1890 to 1984. These are people from Iraq and from again from every single Arab land. To go through all the lands of that, from Tunisia to Morocco and so forth. Every single Arab country, we lived there, and we lived together and flourished in there. And in Palestine, we have people who talk to me about how they remember Deir Yassin, for instance, just an example of one of the, because that was such a criminal. I mean, there's no words for this atrocity that was committed there, amongst so many others. But I've heard it from rabbis who remember how they lived together, and they were the most peaceful and friends, and the Palestinian people. And the Zionists came and wanted to make an example, and they created this terrible atrocity, the genocide, what they did there. And our rabbis told us afterwards, they said, we were so, there's a word, we were aghast. How did they do this to a people that was such peaceful people? How could they do what they did? And of course, they vilified the people of Palestine, the Arabs of Palestine, the Zionists. And then they claimed that most of these towns didn't exist, and they tried to make a fact on the ground by creating the settlements there. But our rabbis, the Jewish rabbis, and there are many people who are alive today still, they should have long, blessed years, the Jewish rabbis who still remember these Arab towns. Well, it's not a question. It's whether it's a fact. There are people alive who bear testimony. Now, of course, from the Palestinian communities, who we meet them constantly from so many different areas, that they lived in this town and that town. So many different beautiful little villages and towns and cities, and it was all taken and stolen by the Zionists. And so to say that we have to explain and tell the people that, go try to talk to people that New York existed. Montreal existed. Believe us that there was a place called Montreal. People look at you crazy. How can you even? I mean, of course it exists. It's there. And now, imagine sometime, a few years in the future, that people will come along and say it didn't exist. That's the same thing what happened over there. To say that in Jaffa and all these other, or from the small towns in Darius, that it wasn't an Arab city, or that it's we're less speechless because it's a fact. And there are people today who can, so many people who will testify to the fact that there were the majority Arab people living there, and some that were totally Arab cities and villages, and some, and many of them were the great majority were Muslims living there and Christians, and then there was the smallest minority were the Jewish people living it. But again, we lived for hundreds of years together in peace. So it's not it's people who want. Either because they simply don't want to live in a life of controversy, so they'll just want to just buy what the news tells them. So they want to accept that what the Zionist narrative is true, or for, I don't know, they're just naive or something, that they buy into this, because it just, with a little scratching the surface, a little homework, you will find that it's a fact on the ground that there were these Arab towns. I mean, we've so many times joined the Palestinian people in marches and through my youth, and all the time we go and they have these big tapestries, with little squares mentioning the so many different Arab and Muslim villages that were existing prior to the Zionist occupation. Facts on the ground, and there is children and grandchildren from these towns and villages. So of course they were there, and it's not this reprehensible, this repulsive statement of Golda Meir and the others that say it was that Palestine was a land without a people, and for people without a land, because it was prior to all the news outlets. The what we have today was before television and internet and all that, maybe just the birth of television. So it was easy to sell this big lie. But there was only a few basic channels or something, and the Zionists had a very big hand in the controlling these news outlets. So of course they had the mic in the hand, and they sold this to people, and people around the world bought into this because that's what the news outlets told them. But of course it's a total fallacy. It's a colossal lie, and it's a nakba. It's a tragedy. It's beyond words. It's a revolt against God. It's a crime against the Almighty. There's no question of this. And we as Jews, our hearts are rent. We are crying. We suffer with them, and we are just we're frustrated because we've been trying from day one. As I showed you, the rabbis speak out. We've had demonstrations. We went to the United Nations in my youth. And as you see, I'm already over 60 years, got it up to 120. We went in my youth. I still remember going to the because I was born in the United States. I went to the United Nations in my youth, and as we marched, and I still remember, and there was no news outlets. We were simply ignored. But we went. Maybe almost every single year we had demonstrations, some of them very large, some of them small, but we've always had large demonstrations of tens of thousands. When we went to the White House, we demonstrated with tens of thousands of people, and there's pictures of this, and yet it was never covered. It doesn't get covered in the news. Barely, if sometimes it would get covered in the Iranian news, or something like that, but the other news outlets refused to even cover the fact, and they ignore the fact that we went with tens of thousands of people in front of the White House to demonstrate against the prime ministers of Israel. But the Jewish people, and this should be a fact that we plead, we would love our Palestinian brothers and sisters to know this, that we have never accepted the occupation. We've suffered because of that. Tens of thousands of Jews moved away of Palestine, even though it was tremendously hard for them. because they didn't want to be under the occupation. And we still have hundreds of thousands of Jews living under the occupation who die and suffer, and they refuse to take the medical aid from them. It costs them hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars every time they have a baby, because they refuse to be recorded as a citizen of Israel. They have to pay tens of thousands of dollars each time they have a baby. Is thousands of dollars, and they're poor. They have large family, and yet they refuse to take the support of the state of Israel. We have special funds that the great chief rabbi of Palestine, of blessed memory, Rabbi Teitelbaum, it's called Karen Hatzolah, the fund to save, and we around the world we give special charities for the Jewish people who refuse to take money from the state of Israel, and this is
Rabbi Weiss.
millions of dollars that it costs, because we're there. The Palestinian brothers should know we hurt with you, we pray to God, and we hope every day for the speedy and peaceful end of this occupation, because God one day will bring that about. It says in the Torah that if you rebel against God, it will not be successful. It will end because it's against the Almighty.
It will end. This is an important point, really. And your speech again is very, very important, I think, very, very many important points. But if we now in the end, in this talking, look a little bit forward. Now Palestine is a country of war, occupation, mistreatment, apartheid. What about the future? What way to try to follow, and what aims to work for in order that this conflict, this occupation of Palestine, this war in Palestine, how to proceed towards peace? What's in your mind, Rabbi Weiss, is the path towards peace in Palestine?
Well, with the help of the Almighty, I will repeat what one of my rabbis, who have long, healthy years, Rabbi Beck, says. We have to separate two issues. Not always, if you cannot give an answer, a solution, that doesn't mean that the problem that you don't that you did not diagnose the problem properly. So we have to separate the two issues. First, we have to understand that the state of Israel is certainly and the villain, not the victim. The creation of the state of Israel is a crime. It's against God. It's against the Jewish religion. End of the sentence. First, that we have to know that. Now, we have to look for a solution. But even if one, God forbid, wouldn't, I mean, the Almighty has a solution, but even if we would not have a solution, that does not make it legitimate or to state that therefore it has a right to exist. The fact is that they've stolen the land from the Palestinian people, and the Torah does not allow it. God does not allow it. They don't have a Jewish backing from the Torah. It's false what they're using the Jewish religion for this occupation. That's first of all. Now, if what we can attempt, we're not prophets, and we're not great enough to say but we can say that it will end, because in the Torah, as I said, it says, "Why are you rebelling against me? It will not be successful." They constantly say, "Look, now we're successful." They said by the 6-day war, and they had the Camp David Accords and Hawaii Accords, and all these different plans that said that this is now it's going to be. We have this true solution, and they walk away saying in Madrid when they had the Oslo Accords, and now it's going to be peace, and everybody's going to be happy with the state of and the state of Israel has the right to exist and so forth. No. And the proof is, and we would at that time demonstrated against them, and we said they have no right to this. We are happy with every inch that is returned to the Palestinian people, and we're not naysayers. We want, we want that God should help. There should be peace and live together. But it can never be accepted, even 1 centimeter of occupation or the existence of the state of Israel. That we will never accept. So that is a fact that it cannot be acceptable. How do we we reach the end of the occupation peacefully? We may not have a solution. But that said, we can say the obvious, and that is that there is an Almighty on this world. And therefore we urge everybody firstly to pray to the Almighty, that with his Almighty, he is the Almighty, that he should bring a speedy and peaceful end dismantlement of the occupation of Palestine, and then Jews will be able to once again, as we've had in those beautiful first days, and not first days, and all these hundreds and thousands of years that we were able to live, these thousands of years we were able to live together in peace in Palestine. So many thousands years. This state is only a matter of 70 odd years, and the Zionist movement is a little over 100. So we pray to God to bring back this end of the occupation. Now, the Almighty will make it happen. How? Maybe we don't know how. That said, we have to let the world know, to separate, to understand the difference between Zionism and Judaism. We have to have them understand that when they look at the Torah, they look at the fact that there is a religion, Judaism, and it does not mean by ending the occupation you are attacking Judaism or the Jewish people. On the contrary, it would be so advisable that the world should hear and see the voices of the chief rabbis of Palestine then, who pleaded that we shouldn't have a state, and see the suffering, what's being done to the Jewish people in Mea Sha'arim, in the Jewish quarters, who refuse to accept the occupation, and they're living there, and they're being oppressed like the Palestinian people. The world should hear and see and understand that what looks to the world that they're the patrons and they're the voice of Judaism, that is a falsehood, and that should be separated the two, and to show the world pictures of how Jews always lived together, and they should be careful that they shouldn't say the Jews or the Jewish state, to differentiate and say the Zionist occupation, not the Jews or a Jewish state. It's not a Jewish state. The people should not fall into this trap of feeling, that they're attacking Judaism, or that it's a tainted issue of anti-Semitism. It should be clear the difference, and to speak constantly of the fact that Jews live well in Iran. Jews always lived in Iran for thousands of years. Until today, Jews live there and practice openly their religion, and Iran is nothing against the Jewish people. And the same thing is with every single Arab community in Arab state. They're not against Judaism. It's against a new political movement that started a little over 100 years ago and caused all this turmoil and rift and suffering, to differentiate between the two and show pictures of our history and hammer home to people, this is the issue. This is the issue, that there is a new
Hva skjedde?
it's a religious conflict between Jews and Muslims. It's nothing to do with a religious conflict. This has to be hammered home and constantly being put on the table when it's being discussed. It should be clarified. The problem is of a new political movement that is a flawed, selfish political movement. Clarify this issue. How do they have the right, the audacity, because they had a few people sat at a table in Europe and they came up with a political idea, and that it should be so stubbornly enforced for so many years, and so much Palestinian and Jewish blood has to be spilled because they want to cement an ideology that's so flawed. Remove that ideology, remove this, and we can live together in peace. We'll pray to God and not be intimidated, and speak up for the Palestinian people, and God help, we will come to the resolution with the end of this occupation and a free Palestine.
Rabbi Weiss, we thank you very, very much for your points. We have learned a lot from hearing your speech here. We thank you again, and let's work together for peace in Palestine, really, by our hearts.